Today we're going to focus on Trump commuting Roger Stone's sentence and why it's even more dangerous than it seems, and my interview with New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, where we talk about Trump leaning into his racist rhetoric, about abolishing the filibuster in the Senate, and yes, his dad jokes. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're listening to No Lie. So, what would a Friday night in the Trump era be without our weekly massacre on democracy? On this week's edition, Trump decided to commute the sentence of his longtime friend and advisor, Roger Stone. I want to talk about why this is so important, even though it might feel like just another one of Trump's daily scandals. It's actually way more dangerous than that, because it wasn't just him throwing a lifeline to his buddy. It was actually Trump protecting himself and continuing to facilitate a cover-up of his own crimes. So real quick, consider why Stone was in prison. Roger Stone was a key figure in the Trump campaign's attempts to cooperate with the Russians ahead of the 2016 election. He was the go-between for the Trump campaign and WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks had been chosen by Russian officials to dump information that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton. And that includes emails hacked from the DNC and Clinton's campaign chairman, John Podesta. All of that was done with the intent of helping Trump win. When questioned about it by Congress, Stone said he had no connections with WikiLeaks or its founder, Julian Assange. He lied under oath. He had hundreds. He told Congress that he never discussed WikiLeaks with the Trump campaign, and again, lied under oath. He had extensive discussions with this stuff over the course of months with Paul Manafort, Rick Gates, Steve Bannon, even Trump. Trump himself knew that WikiLeaks had been coordinating with the Russians and was about to release information. How do we know? Because Trump's deputy campaign chairman, Rick Gates, testified under oath to this. So in other words, by refusing to disclose this information to investigators, Stone was covering up the Trump campaign's efforts to coordinate with WikiLeaks while WikiLeaks was part of a Russian cyber attack targeting our election, our democracy. Let me put it this way. Roger Stone was colluding with the Russians on Trump's behalf, and Trump knew, and I seem to remember Russian collusion being kind of a big deal. So, of course, they had a vested interest in hiding it. Kind of hard to claim no collusion if the guy responsible for the collusion admits under oath that he did the colluding, right? So, instead, Trump's longtime pal stayed silent, knowing that Trump would bail him out, and he did exactly that. And that wasn't lost on anyone. During Stone's trial, lead prosecutor Aaron Zelinsky said, quote, "The evidence in this case will show that Roger Stone lied to the House Intelligence Committee because the truth looked bad. The truth looked bad for the Trump campaign, and the truth looked bad for Donald Trump," end quote. Even Stone himself basically acknowledged that he was let off because he had information that was damaging to Trump. This week, he told a journalist that Trump, quote, "knows I was under enormous pressure to turn on him. It would have eased my situation considerably, but I didn't." In other words, Stone is saying that he resisted pressure to turn on Trump, only you can't turn on someone unless they did something. So he's acknowledging that crimes were committed here. Even the DOJ, which prosecuted Stone, believed that he deserved his sentence. The sentencing memo wrote that Stone, quote, "committed serious offenses and deserves a sentence of incarceration that is sufficient but not greater than necessary." And speaking of the DOJ, it's been reported from an administration official that Bill Barr had discussed clemency for Roger Stone with Trump and recommended against it, that he said the prosecution was righteous and his sentencing was fair. So the official said that the Justice Department had nothing to do with Trump's decision to commute Stone's sentence. And I just have to say, fuck Bill Barr. Because it's one thing to be a corrupt, reprehensible piece of shit, but it's entirely another thing to treat everyone else like they're idiots while doing it. This is Bill Barr trying to come out looking righteous by issuing a statement that he didn't support this decision. Give me a break. You want to know who Bill Barr is? Listen to this. So Roger Stone initially had a sentence of between 7 and 9 years. That sentence was recommended by prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office. That was followed by a Trump temper tantrum on Twitter. And so just hours later, hours after that temper tantrum, suddenly the Justice Department reversed course and revised its sentencing recommendation and called for, quote, "far less time behind bars." And in case you thought this was a big group effort, no, because all 4 prosecutors involved quit the case. One guy even quit the government altogether. This was Bill Barr's unilateral decision, a decision made to kowtow to Trump's request. And as if that wasn't obvious enough on its own, Trump tweeted at Bill Barr thanking him. He wrote, quote, Congratulations to Attorney General Bill Barr for taking charge of a case that was totally out of control and perhaps should not have even been brought. Dude wrote congratulations for reducing the sentencing recommendation for a felon who lied to Congress, tampered with witnesses, and obstructed a congressional investigation. Yeah, congrats, man. That's who Bill Barr is. A shameless political operative perfectly content to turn the DOJ into a political arm of the White House. So when he comes out and says that he recommended against it, sorry if my gut reaction is to think that the guy could not be more full of shit. If he was actually against this, he'd have some principles and resign in protest, just like those 4 prosecutors on the Stone case did. But he'll never do that because principles aren't even a distant thought here. So please do not buy Bill Barr's tired image rehab. The craziest part is that while this is all going on, the right wants you to get pissed off about statues, about NASCAR and NFL, about Mount Rushmore, about Goya beans. The CEO of Goya had come out and said, "We are all truly blessed to have a leader like President Trump." And there was obvious pushback by Latinos that the CEO of the most recognized Hispanic brand in the United States was pandering to a president who's called Mexicans rapists and locked immigrant kids in cages. And the right has fallen over itself to keep this in the news because they need these culture war wedge issues. They need them. And if you watch Fox News, that's all you see. You'll think the biggest issue in America right now is Goya beans. The great Goya beans scandal of 2020. This is what conservative media is whipping its viewers into a frenzy over. While their side's president and attorney general are conspiring in these mafia-esque schemes to defraud the justice system. And that's what it is. It is the wholesale undermining of the rule of law being carried out in broad daylight, brought to you by the law and order president himself. I mean, Stone sat for a jury trial. A jury convicted him of 7 felonies. He admitted that he kept quiet despite being able to flip on Trump, meaning that incriminating evidence exists. And then he got rewarded for his silence. Like, this administration is so egregiously corrupt that it's now a wedge issue to suggest that a president shouldn't be able to commute the sentence of a man sentenced to prison for helping that president. That's where we're at. Keep in mind, too, that this is being done in the midst of unprecedented civil rights demonstrations around the country. There have been millions of Americans who've taken to the streets demanding justice. And the fact that now, during these protests, is when Trump decides to completely shit on the rule of law goes to show that he cannot be bothered to acknowledge what's happening in this country beyond his own personal interests. The largest protest in American history over the fact that our policing system, our justice system is in so many ways corrupt, and the president of the United States' response here is to free a guy from prison to reward his silence, to protect himself. You can't not meet this moment more than that. I don't know how we expect any reforms to justice to come out of a White House where the president himself is surrounded by criminals. And that's not just me being like hysterical. He literally surrounds himself with criminals. Michael Cohen, Michael Flynn, Rick Gates, Paul Manafort, George Papadopoulos, Roger Stone, all convicted. But because Trump's priority is himself and clearing his name and convincing his supporters that the whole thing is a Democratic hoax, he'll stop at nothing to undermine this entire process that got those guys convicted in the first place. That's how committed to the bit he is. It's not enough to just lie and say that the Mueller probe, for example, was a witch hunt. He's actually trying to undo the legitimately found convictions that the Mueller probe brought. Between Trump and Bill Barr, look what happened. Michael Flynn pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. DOJ drops the case. Paul Manafort was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison, gets released from prison early due to coronavirus concerns. And now Roger Stone was sentenced to 40 months in prison. Trump commutes his sentence. There are no lengths that this guy won't go to in order to try and will into existence this idea that his own bullshit gaslighting is true. And look, in fairness, Trump is not the first president to use commutations or pardons to help out friends or political allies. Bush did it, Clinton did it, but no president has ever done it so systematically to protect himself. Of the 36 pardons or commutations that Trump's issued, 31 were to advance his political goals or to help someone that he has a personal connection with. 31 out of 36. To Trump, the presidency is just licensed to commit crimes and get away with them. Here's the thing. The optics are terrible for Trump, and it's being condemned across the political spectrum. Pelosi's called it staggering corruption, and she's promised to pursue legislation that would prevent the president from using his powers to protect those convicted of a cover-up on his own behalf, although I can't imagine that a Republican Senate or Trump himself would sign that into law. Mitt Romney has called it unprecedented, historic corruption. And Trump did this before the election. This was Trump's pitch to voters, him on his best behavior. So what I'm getting at is that there's a world in which you see this and the takeaway becomes that Trump doesn't think he's going to get reelected. You don't do crimes on the campaign trail. I mean, you don't do crimes at all, but I think that bus has left the station. But if you're going to commit crimes, you might want to wait until after you don't have to face the voters. So the fact that he isn't may very well be a tacit acknowledgement that he's done. And so his only priority now is to save his own ass, which includes helping out his buddy Roger Stone so that he keeps him happy and quiet. He knows that if he can deprive the justice system of a key figure cooperating with them, that he'll be that much safer. So why wait until November when he could just do it now? And I'm not saying that that's definitely what's happening, and it may very well be wishful thinking on my part, but I just don't see a planet on which committing impeachable offenses 4 months out from the election is a big selling point for the campaign. So how do we deal with this now? I guess there are two options. One is we could again call for Trump's impeachment, because the fact remains that that's the tool at our disposal when the president commits an impeachable offense. He's commuting Stone's sentence in exchange for Stone not rolling on him. His commuting Stone's sentence in exchange for Stone not rolling on him is a quid pro quo. It's a bribe. Bribery is literally defined in the Constitution as an impeachable offense. And yes, he's been impeached, but if you get arrested for murder once, you don't have carte blanche to commit more murders, right? Like, you get arrested each time. Same theory applies with Trump. And yet, at the same time, it's July of an election year. So let's be realistic. The House isn't going to open up an impeachment inquiry. It's not a political winner. We have a pandemic to focus on. And even if he did get impeached, the Senate's not going to remove him. And for those saying, well, that's the law, look, I get it. But our first, second, and third priority has to be getting this guy out of office. So if an impeachment doesn't lend itself to our goal, then we have to be able to acknowledge that. We have to be able to see the forest through the trees, right? So what's the right answer? Look, if you're angry, if you're worried about the state of our democracy, then our recourse right now, not to sound trite, is to vote. It's to make sure your whole family is registered, even your little sister who, when you tell her you interviewed Adam Schiff, thought that was a Supreme Court justice. Even the people who do not follow politics, you engage them. I've said this before and I'll say it again, the organizing can't just be left to the organizers. You have so much more influence over the people in your lives than some kid phone banking from 1,000 miles away. If everyone took care of their circles, their families, their friends, then that is flawless organization, foolproof organization. And there's no reason why we can't, but it's up to you. Even if you find one person who wouldn't have otherwise voted, then you've done your job. As Barack Obama says, don't boo, vote. If you're listening on YouTube, check out my interview with Senator Booker on the interviews playlist on my channel. That's it for this episode. Talk to you next week. You've been listening to No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, produced by Sam Graber, music by Wellesley, and recorded in Los Angeles, California. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your preferred podcast app, feel free to leave a 5-star rating and a review, and check out briantylercohen.com for links to all of my other channels.